Oh yes, you're very welcome. So, yes, we already talked about free and fair elections, and I'm thrilled to see in so many interested faces here today, because we're going to talk about a very important topic, which is especially this year crucial, because this is the year of major elections, including the one for the European Parliament in June. So how can the elections be not only free, but also fair? And how can disinformation in times of deep fakes and fake news and social media and propaganda be prevented? For this, we have a great lineup of experts again. A warm welcome to Alma Zadić, Austrian Federal Minister of Justice, who brings her experience in law and international organizations. Welcome. Thank you for being here. Next, we have virtually Adam Bodnar, Minister of Justice in Poland and a key figure in ensuring the rule of law in the country. Welcome, Minister Bodnar. Joining us virtually again is Massimo Tommasoli, Director of Global Program at the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance. Thank you very much for being here with us. And then we have...
Thank you for having me.
Walczak, co-founder of our Rule of Law Foundation, who engages youth in promoting the rule of law. Thank you for being here. And last but not least, we have Matteo Mecacci, Director of the Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, ODIHR, and of the OSCE, who brings invaluable insights into monitoring and ensuring the integrity of elections. Welcome.
Thank you.
Well, I'd like to start with Minister Bodnar. As a Minister of Justice and a former ombudsman, how do you view the role of the EU in upholding democracy and the rule of law, especially regarding the upcoming elections?
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for inviting me to this great Fundamental Rights Forum. Unfortunately, due to my daily duties, I cannot attend and cannot be with you in Vienna. This recovery from the rule of law crisis takes a lot of time and energy, and basically I have to concentrate on those things. But I think that I have quite a lot to say regarding free and fair elections, not only in the context of European Parliament elections, but in the context of what was happening in Poland during the last couple of years, because I think Poland could be a case for other countries of different problems and different observations regarding what really free and fair elections mean. I think in the context of the European Parliament elections, maybe I will start with this, we should remember that they cannot, in my opinion, be fully free and fair in a situation when we do not have a free media all across Europe. There are some countries, there are some EU member states that suffer because of the democratic crisis and the rule of law crisis, and the situation of media in those countries have a tremendous impact on the result of elections. Surely the European Union took the initiative of passing the European Media Freedom Act, and in my opinion, it is the step in a good direction. But we should not forget that even if this legislation is adopted, it does not change the situation in the national in a given member state. Because in some countries there might be a situation that the ruling party or the leader of the ruling party has a tremendous impact on the media coverage because of the media ownership structures, the use of the public media. And in my opinion, the European Union should take care not only by passing legislation, but also by implementing different measures in order to safeguard proper media pluralism in a given country, because otherwise it might have a tremendous impact on the result of elections. When it comes to Poland, to my country, 2023 was really important year for us. Elections on 15th October gave a victory to the Democratic Coalition. But we should remember that it was not an easy victory. It was a victory in which we had to fight against a threat of so-called competitive authoritarianism. So the previous ruling party, Land Justice Party, had different instruments at the disposal in order to secure a better starting position in elections. So I would say that on the date of elections, everything was relatively okay without any significant problems. But basically, this change happened before elections. And I would like to enumerate here, especially the role of the public media that were used just in order to safeguard the opinion of the previous ruling party. Different reprisals against civil society organizations, judges, prosecutors. And the third thing was, I would say, the use of the public resources. And I think that this last element is especially crucial. So, in my opinion, one of the standards regarding free and fair elections should be the guarantee that public resources, such resources that are at the disposal of ministries, that are at the disposal of different special state funds, or that are at the disposal of the state-owned companies, shouldn't be used for the purposes of electoral competing. And in a situation when public institutions safeguarding elections, such as National Electoral Committee or courts, are becoming weaker and weaker, it is much easier to use public resources in order to compete in elections and in order to create this unfair advantage over competitors. So I think that the Polish electoral success of 2023 is bigger than one could expect, because we did the ruling coalition, the current ruling coalition, the Democratic coalition, won those elections, not only because of, let's say, presenting better program, but also because of overcoming all those substantial material disadvantages that were kind of built and used in order to secure electoral winning. You know, right now in Poland, we observe also one more element, which is how secret services have been used in order to secure another win by the previous ruling party, by the Law and Justice Party. And here I would like to mention the use of the Pegasus spyware. So the situation that in some EU member states, the Pegasus spyware is used in order to check opponents, to check political opponents, to check human rights defenders, independent prosecutors or barristers, is something which is extremely vulnerable from the point of view of the quality of the democracy. So I would like to say that this electoral result was possible thanks to the involvement of the civil society, of different independent institutions. I see here the director of ODIHR, Mr. Mecacci, and ODIHR was really fundamental here also in safeguarding free and fair elections, in just giving this kind of a check on what could be done and what shouldn't be done. But still, I think we have to look deeply into the use of different state resources, secret services, media that are dependent on the government, as basically creating undue advantage for those that are at power during elections. Thank you very much for your attention.
So maybe we can say then that the trust in democratic processes was rebuilt in Poland. Mr. Zadić, what would you say? How can the independence of electoral bodies be ensured in general?
Yeah, I think that's the question of the questions. If we would know the correct answer, we would solve all our problems. But I think one of the main things that we need to focus is to realize how we can strengthen the electoral process on the one hand, but also on the other hand, ensure that democratic system and the rule of law is strong. And why is that important? It is important because it ensures trust. Mm-hmm. And I think we have a severe trust issue in our democratic societies. Trust issues that the trust of the people towards the institutions is decreasing. And this is dangerous because then we have less and less people going to vote or opposing a vote because they don't think that their vote can change something. And I think this is this brings us into a vicious circle where we don't want to be. And in order to get out of this vicious circle, we need to convince the people that the democratic institutions and democratic processes are worth it. And in particular, if you look at the polls of young people, and there have been recent polls of young people in Germany, they are losing trust in our democratic systems. And I think there are 3 points where we need to increase trust. And first of all is representation. We need to make sure that people feel represented by the political parties, by the decision makers. And I mean represented in all different means, being different ages, different backgrounds, but also social backgrounds. Because a lot of people from also poor or less educated families don't feel represented by those in political powers. And the second thing is, of course, disinformation. And the fight against disinformation is everywhere now. Everyone is talking about it. But to be honest, I don't think that we are trying hard, but I don't think that we are well equipped to meet all this disinformation that is spread out there. If you look what is spread out through TikTok and other social media outlets, it's very difficult to get hold of it. A lot of young people are receiving their information only via social media, which means that we really need to make sure how to reach young people and really need to make sure how to combat disinformation. There is this Digital Service Act on the European level that now entered into force and is applicable in all member countries. And I think it's a huge step how we can reach the big platforms or how we can control the big platforms, or force the big platforms to make sure that they regulate the platforms properly so that disinformation, false information, hate is not distributed through these channels. And the third thing, and being a Minister of Justice, this is for me of utmost importance, is the fight against corruption and transparency. Because corruption, corruption is, if you interlink it with democracy, democracy gives two promises. And the promise of democracy is that everyone has the same rights and that everyone with his or her vote can change the political system or can provide for a change. But with corruption, these two promises are undermined. And this is the very reason why we as a democratic society need to do whatever we can to fight corruption, because it undermines the promise of democracy that everyone is equal. Yeah. Because with corruption, there are a few that are more equal than others. And this is one of the reasons why I think that fighting corruption and providing transparency is one of the most important pillars in ensuring trust in democracy and the political actors.
Yeah, thank you very much. You mentioned various aspects, and I'm going to come back to disinformation and information as well. But first, I would like to come to you, Matteo Mecacci. So, how do you envision the role of institutions like the OSCE in monitoring and also ensuring the integrity of elections?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question and for the invitation. Our institution is member of an international organization, and we have been observing elections for over 30 years, since the 90s, more than 400 times across the 57 participating states of the OSCE. So this instrument was built with two goals in mind. And the first one is to make sure that citizens have trust in the electoral process. The minister just mentioned more about the capacity of democracies to deliver, to engage, and to involve citizens to participate. And that's a political question, you know, what politicians have to offer to the citizenship for them to be able to participate. But at the basis of that, there is the need for the people to know that when they participate, they have an opportunity to express their vote and what they say in the most important moment in the life of the nation, where all the citizens come together to delegate their power to the politicians, because this is what democracy is about. It's basically people giving power to the politicians to represent themselves, they need to know they can trust the system. And so what an impartial and professional election observation does is to make sure that the national elections comply with the international democratic and human rights standards that have been established at the international level. And this is also important as a sort of confidence-building measures, because we are now talking about Europe, where we have fairly well-developed democratic institutions. But if you look at our organization, 57 countries, there are still countries which are either transitioning towards democracy or actually they're going backwards. So the presence of international observers, in some cases, it's an essential element, for example, for opposition to be able to participate in election, for civil society to be able to operate in a country and to be able to monitor the situation on human rights, for journalists to be able to report honestly on these issues. And so these elements should not be underestimated, because we may think that in our part of the world democracy has been achieved, but actually we see challenges to democratic institutions even within Europe, or frankly, even in North America. We know what happened 4 years ago, and we know that this November there will be crucial election for shaping the global agenda in the United States. So I think the message is that, of course, every country needs to participate, invite others to observe, and unfortunately we see reluctance from few member states of our organization to invite observers. The latest was from the Russian Federation and from Belarus. So how do we respond to this? I think the need to continue to engage more with citizens and internationally on this topic will be crucial to shaping really the global agenda in the near future.
Yeah, and if we talk about participation, it's also important to get young people to engage more, Anna Walczak. So how would it be possible to get many first-time voters to go to the European Parliament elections, for example?
Right, thank you so much for your question. And first of all, on behalf of our Rule of Law Foundation, thank you for inviting us to the Fundamental Rights Forum. And when it comes to the first-time voters, it's important to realize that in the last European Parliament election, 6 out of 10 first-time voters did not participate in the elections, which is quite problematic in itself. And why is it problematic is because whether or not we participate in the first electoral cycle that we're eligible to vote in, it's really defining for our future voting habits. And of course, it is very important to engage as many first-time voters as possible in the upcoming European Parliament elections. This is also what we do with our Rule of Law Foundation. We're currently actually just closed an application for a fellowship program for first-time voters, where they can participate and essentially learn why it's so important to vote in the elections, and also equip them with the necessary tools to do so. Because it's not enough to just say, please go to vote, you actually need to know how. And I think what is really important for the European Union to do is to meet the first-time voters where they are. And the ways to do it, I think there are like 3 ways we can ensure that. And first of all is, of course, knowing what are the values that the first-time voters care for. But actually, it's not enough just to know those values. It is really important to understand why something is important for first-time voters. Because let's say we look at climate change, right? It's a value that a lot of young people care for, but for different reasons. Like, let's say we have first-time voters from Spain, let's call her Marta, and Marta is really worried about wildfires happening next to her house every summer. That's why she cares about climate change. But let's say we have I don't know, let's call someone Adam, a first-time voter from a small town in Poland that cares about climate change because his father is a farmer and the climate change impact the harvest every year. So first-time voters really need to be met where they are, and really their needs need to be addressed in a specific context. And then when we identify why, right, we still need to translate it how the European Union, European Parliament actually takes care of those issues. And this is already a very complicated process for people who actually know a lot about the institutional setup. And it's actually even harder for first-time voters, let's say someone who is 18, just finishing high school, to understand what is the role in the legislative process in the European Parliament and how the fact that someone go to elections actually can impact those choices. And there's a last element, which are voting technicalities, and we really cannot take them for granted. And of course we say, like, yes, European Parliament elections, those are the dates, 6th to 9th of June. Great, really clear communication, but actually that's not the case in Poland, right? The elections in Poland are only on the 9th of June. So in the communication that it's about like technicalities of voting, it's really important to be clear, to be precise, to identify the things that can be problematic for first-time voters, even how the ballot looks like. You know, it's kind of stressful to know for who to vote, that's a first, but like how even put a cross, or do you mark it? How do we do it? So in order to get as many as possible first-time voters, European Union really need to take a step to meet them where they are and make sure their needs are fulfilled.
Yeah, and I've seen Massimo, Tommasoli nodding, because apart from first-time voters, there are also the marginalized groups. So what strategies can be implemented to increase the voter turnout also for marginalized groups?
Thank you very much for the question. We should first of all understand what are the reasons why marginalized groups may be less engaged in the political processes. And for this reason, we at International IDEA have carried out a survey in 19 countries with a sample of representative population and an additional sample of marginalized people according to different categories that they define to identify themselves as marginalized. And one of the findings of this analysis is that in most countries, this sample of marginalized people felt less confident about the electoral process. There was reduced trust on their side in the electoral process. And we should ask why. One element that was recalled by Matteo Mecacci was the element of the political capacity for democracy to deliver. But we should unbundle this element. Democracy should deliver, but for whom and by whom? And probably there lies the answer to the feeling of exclusion of these marginalized communities. The other aspect, which is very important, is that elections and electoral processes should be as inclusive as possible. And I would like also to refer to what Minister Bodnar said before about the safeguarding of the electoral process per se. I think that a lot of the trust in the electoral process is linked to not really only to the personal experience of voting, but also to the perception of whether the electoral process is trustworthy and the importance of the other institutions that can guarantee this credibility of elections is key. Clearly, delivering for marginalized communities may mean delivering in terms of employment or economic inequality. So the feelings of inequality, deep-rooted inequality, should also be addressed by political actors in order to increase the opportunities for these marginalized communities to engage in the political process.
So trust is a big issue. In some countries, there was a decrease in trust in political processes and institutions. But Minister Bodnar, what steps did Poland take to counter disinformation during the elections, to build trust as well into the electoral process?
Thank you very much for this important question. Our problem was that on the one hand, we could observe disinformation that is coming from abroad. I mean here, obviously, Russia influence. On the other hand, please look that some of the Polish media have been used in order to secure another win for the previous ruling party. And sometimes you could also observe that this information is coming even from, let's say, the government itself. And it created a huge challenge from the point of view of the electoral process, because you couldn't really challenge it just with the use of typical means. It couldn't be like a typical state policy to challenge that kind of a disinformation if some elements of manipulation, abuse of media have been used as a political instrument. But I would like to say that in this regard, important role could be played by civil society organizations. So there are different fact-checking institutions in Poland that were on the daily basis checking what was promoted in media by politicians of different political parties. Second, there is a procedure that allows for challenging some of the false information distributed in media in front of the courts, before courts. So some political opponents were basically using this procedure in order to stop the process of disinformation. So here I would like to underline that this access to remedies and access to independent courts could be extremely important in the context of fighting for really free and fair elections. But also, in order to do it, you must have resources. So in order to tackle disinformation, in order to check the information, you must have a proper funding. So the access to independent funding in the process, in the electoral process, it's also an important factor. And last but not least, I would like to indicate the role of journalists. Because one thing is our independent media, the other thing is whether independent journalists have a place to work and have resources for thanks to which they may operate properly and they may do their proper work. So over the last years, I see emergence of different forms of funding for independent journalism, also different forms of cooperation, transborder cooperation between journalists, thanks to which they may uncover some of the stories that are important for the political process. So if I may suggest anything to leaders of the European Union, I would say that supporting investigative journalism is one of the best vaccines for not only quality of democracy, but also for the whole democratic process. So we should really take care of it. And in my opinion, it is not just a question of adopting legislation on strategic lawsuits against public participation. I am very happy that this legislation has been adopted. But in addition to it, we must secure proper funding for securing proper workplaces for investigative journalists, because in the electoral process, but on a daily basis, they serve an important function in our democracies.
Yeah, so the freedom of press is very important for a good democracy, for a real democracy. But we have much disinformation, we have propaganda. So, Minister Zadić, how can voters be educated to be critical about information, and how can they maybe also combat disinformation?
I believe that this is one of the major challenges for our societies nowadays, to educate voters and to educate voters to be critical towards the information they receive. In particular, young people because they spend so much time on different platforms, on social media platforms, be it TikTok, Instagram, and so on, they tend to, and because so many fake news and false information is out there, it's very difficult for them to understand what is the truth, what's the fact behind it. That's why I think that educating young people at a very young age and teaching them media competences are incredibly important. And the second part, and this is what my colleague Adam mentioned, is making sure that we restore or enable the journalists to do their job. Because if I look if you look in Austria, we see more and more media outlets complaining that they don't have enough resources. A lot of big media houses need to let go journalists because they just don't have the resources. So we have to find ways to enable journalists to do their job, to have time to research a story and not only write what the different agencies say, like the Austrian Presseagentur and others. So providing the media outlets with enough resources, I think, is important to ensure democracy, because what we face now, and this has been the topic of a lot of discussions this year, is that the fine line between truth and false news vanishes. And people don't know nowadays what or whom should they trust. And this is where I think the media outlets become important, more important than ever, to make sure that to organize the information that is there and provide context to the information.
Yes, and especially in times of social media where many people are online and can't sometimes differ between good sources and, let's say, bad sources with misinformation.
And if I may just add one point, and this is artificial intelligence. The large language models and artificial intelligence make it even more difficult to recognize what is truth and what is not.
Absolutely. So, Matteo, Mecacci, what would you say, how can the independence of press be protected to ensure accurate reporting during election periods?
Well, one of the activities that we carry out when we do election observation is actually monitoring the media during the campaign. Of course, when we observe elections, we look at the election day procedure, but it's a much more complex exercise. And by the way, in the election observation community, we have run away from using the term free and fair, because of course it's an easy way to capture the essence of what you want to describe as a legitimate process, but actually elections are much more complex. And actually this type of approach is now being used by a number of countries who are not inviting impartial international observers, but actually there's a plethora of organizations that are now engaged in international observation, and they do not follow a very thorough and systematic methodology. And what they do, they come out at the end of the process saying, well, this election was free and fair, without analytical or systematic analysis. This is important to remember because as it is a complex exercise, the media component and access to information for citizens is an essential element of any elections. Participating in elections means that you have the right to choose. If you don't have the right to and access to information, you are not free to choose. If you don't know what are the different political opponents are proposing, if the proponents they don't have the same access to citizens, they don't have a fair shot at really winning the elections. So what we do actually, we both monitor the traditional media, including radio, TV, analyzing minute by minute what every media does. But also, since a couple of years, we have started to monitor campaign also on social media. Because of course, that is a more gray area where it is more difficult, for example, to have access to the sources of the information which is shared on social media. But there are some, for example, legal requirements on campaign finance, where political forces now have to report also about their investment in social media to reach citizens. And if you have a huge presence of social media favoring one side, which cannot be tracked to finance, that are going to be declared in that country, that opens the question about possible interference and what can come from that environment. So this is something that we have to continue to look at, to develop a methodology that is going to meet the challenge of the times that we meet. But of course, access to information, Minister Bodnar mentioned, the situation, for example, of public media. It is very important that the public media is not captured by anyone who's in government, because the public media is there to be able to provide a sort of objective analysis and fact-checking of the events that are happening. And of course, the variety of media should be allowed, but I think we have to look back and not consider the public media as a sort of obsolete tool, but actually it's a tool that could be strengthened and actually allow people to really have access to facts or opinions. Whether they choose opinions, they can choose their own favorite media, but if you want to have facts, I think it's also important to have those sources of information available to citizens.
So what would you say then, Massimo Tommasoli? How do you see the role of platforms in safeguarding election integrity?
This is a key word used by Minister Bodnar in his first intervention, safeguards. It's a very important element. And I think the role of social platforms, social media platforms and state on one hand, and the role of electoral authorities on the other is of paramount importance. The social media platforms and states must implement policy and regulatory safeguards to ensure the integrity of the information space, whereas the electoral authorities should play a role in ensuring access to reliable election-related content. Specifically for the platforms, I think there are 4 areas where they should and could play a much forceful role. The first one is to ensure the trustworthiness and information plurality during elections. The second point is about diminishing the reach and effects of disinformation and misinformation or malinformation in all its forms. The third is to strengthen the accountability of highly influential actors and influencers during elections. And fourthly, to enable the independent scrutiny of the efforts. And together with a number of other civil society organizations, we have defined and launched recently a document which is about protecting democratic elections through safeguarding of the information integrity, that detail also some very concrete examples with many of the things that were covered in the previous speakers' interventions. For example, addressing the abuse of artificial intelligence or the spread of fake news to distort facts or to create noise or even micro-targeting audiences with sort of hyper-segmented messages that may influence their electoral behavior. All of this is part of a new threat to the integrity of elections, but I would say that we shouldn't forget also that the old guard good ways used by authoritarian regimes in the past in order to manipulate are still active also offline. So it is very important to continue to consider both the digital, online, and the offline ecosystems.
So one of the offline ecosystems could be the civil organizations then. Anna Walczak, last but not least, because we have 2 minutes left, what would you say, what role can civil organizations play in promoting fact-based discourse and informed voting?
One of the ways to fight disinformation is providing reliable information. And this is one of the innovative ways to also engage first-time voters in doing so. And from our experience, from experience of our rule of law, and also once someone really wise told me that you learn the most by doing. So we need to provide first-time voters any voters on that note an opportunity to do exactly so. And in the context of first-time voters, it's also very important to not only do something for them, but with them. And following up on this idea of providing reliable information, that's also something we do in our rule of law, in our new program, where we gather first-time voters. Actually, I will tell you how the program works really briefly, I promise. It's a kind of three-stage program where in the first stage, the first-time voters have a unique opportunity to participate in the research stage. So they, by themselves, learn how the European Parliament works, what is the relationship between their national parties and also the parties in the European Parliament, and what are the values that the young people care for. But of course, research is one thing, the communication of it is another. So for the second part of the project will focus precisely on that. So for 2 days, we'll gather all of the participants in a bootcamp in Humboldt University in Berlin, where they will exchange the findings of their research and also test different communication strategies of that particular research. And of course, to conclude the program, all of the findings and the lessons learned will be put in a report, of course, available to all the institutions and civil society actors.
Thank you very much for that. And I see that we also have some questions on Slido. Thanks for your participation. I would suggest, because we're running out of time, that we forward the questions offline to our panelists so that they can maybe come back to you if you have also your email address. I don't know if this is the way it works, but we will try to manage that. And thank you very much for your insights. And you have a final remark?
Just 10 seconds. I just want to mention that we will be observing also the European Parliament elections.
Yes.
There will be a number of experts that will travel to all the 27 countries, or almost all of them, and we will issue a statement on the compliance of the European election standards and rules with the international, democratic standards that we have all agreed upon. So we will publish a statement the following day, on June 10th, and in the summer we will provide a more detailed analysis of the European Parliament observation elections. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matteo Mecacci, Anna Walczak, Massimo Tommasoli, Adam Bodnar, and Minister Zadić. Thank you very much for being here and for those insights. Thank you. Thank you very much for being here, also in person. You can go this way.
Thank you very much. We will have next a labeled as Connect, Reflect, Act Talk with Lilian Thuram. But when we offered this to him, he said, I prefer a dialogue. And so we transformed it into what we call an X meets Z dialogue. It's the same format we use in the marketplace of connections. There have already been a few of them, and there will be more in these 2 days. So in this dialogue, we will have Lilian Thuram, anti-racism activist, founder of his own foundation, Education Against Racism, author of La Pensée Blanche, The White Thinking, as it is translated in English, but in quite a few other languages as well. So check that out if it's available in your language as well. Another book, My Black Stars, also written by him. Of course, in an earlier life, he had a career as a very prestigious and very successful footballer, winning with France the World Championship in 1998. Now, in this X meets Z setting, he will be interviewed and have a conversation with Manon Minassian. Manon is a doctoral researcher in international relations at the University of Glasgow, exploring the linkages between care and anti-colonial resistance. The conversation will be facilitated by Professor David Murphy, who will translate the answers of Lilian Thuram in French into English. And we are very grateful for David's participation here as well. So can I ask the three of you to come forward?